we're going to be discussing criminology, social disorganization theories based on our readings, page 316 to 317. And I'm going to be discussing two different studies. One was done in LA and one was done in England. And so the one in LA was done by Leo Schuerman and Solomon Kobrin. They were criminology researchers and professors at California universities, and their study titled Community Careers in Crime. Schuerman and Kobrin's 1986 study analyzed LA County's juvenile crime data from 1950 to 1970. Of their study was that it used four main measures to determine factors that lead to delinquency. The first was land use, the second was population composition, the third was socioeconomic status, and the fourth was subculture. And so in the first one with land use, they described how there's three different stages of a town or area and how it could lead to delinquency. The first was emerging, where it's a new town with new housing developments and emerging businesses. At this time, it's usually a closer knit resident and families, and more community feeling, and usually higher socioeconomic statuses of the residents because they're able to afford the new houses and the new developments. After a few years, it can go into the transitional stage, which is the second stage, and this is where it's aging into a more established town. The businesses may begin to close and open, and only the stable ones will remain open. Housing also will fluctuate, and this is when the basic crime rates may begin. In the third stage, the enduring stage, after many years or decades, there may lead to stagnation, shifting residents as people start to move in and out, and there's going to be more strangers. There's also usually more community social disorganization as housing starts to deteriorate and the crime rates continue to rise. Moving on to the signs that Schuerman and Kobrin attributed that can show neighborhood deterioration. And these quotes are taken directly from the reading on page 316. The first one was that it can be a shift from houses to apartment, so the residents can't afford to buy houses, and so there's less stable residency. The second is residential mobility, meaning people move around a lot or they rent temporary housing. The third is unrelated individuals and broken families living together or not being able to live together, and this just means that childcare will be lower. Um, Fourth is high ratio of kids to low adults, and this usually is if there's just less adults or they are working, and this leads to lack of supervision and can cause juvenile delinquency to rise. And then minority group populations, this means that they're disenfranchised or poor. The sixth point they gave was women in the workforce, and this usually means if they were in a lower socioeconomic status, they had to work to support the family and they were unable to fully supervise the kids. Last one, and so basically based on all of these and the part about less home ownership leading to more crime, that was one part of Schuerman and Corbin's study that reflected what Shaw and McKay's prior study in the 1940s had also concluded. The second point they made was about population composition, and they studied various characteristics such as the race, and so a white majority versus non-white majority areas, and how those different population concentrations can affect the crime rates. They also looked at female participation in the labor force, and they saw that in LA during the 1950s to 70s, the labor force participation dropped for both Black and white women in high delinquency areas. They also looked at high population turnover and how people move in and out. As they move in and out a lot from a community, it can lead to less stable community bonds and more strangers, and this leads to higher delinquency. And then this quote from our text says that there were also significant increases in the degree of overcrowding in high delinquency areas, which supported the findings of Lander 1954, Bourdois 1959, and Chilton 1964. And so this population composition factor can also go into the subculture point where the community's composition leads to what its values and culture will be, and that influences the delinquency. Socioeconomic status is the third important one, and they found that there was a low number of educated people as well as low professionals and skilled workers. And this supported Shaw and McKay's proposal that delinquency was positively correlated with the percentage of people renting and negatively correlated with the percentage of homes owned. And so basically, poor people can't afford single-family houses due to things like mortgage and bills, and so this leads to more rentership and because it's in temporary housing usually with rentership, and it can be even inaffordable at that point. This leads to weaker commitment to the homes and weaker community bonds. So socioeconomic status preceded increases in delinquency only in transitional and enduring stages, and this basically means that people became poor first, and that is what led to high crime rates, not vice versa. And so modern applications and program applications of Schuerman and Kobrin's study is that because it was directly taken from police force statistics, it was very impactful to the Los Angeles legal scene as well as the research scene. And since both of them were California-based professors, it affected the criminological academia and future studies, especially the grant-funded ones. And this shows the interaction between government interaction with academia and how it affects the criminal justice field. The study was also published by the University of Chicago, showing that even though it was an LA study, it did have a wider national impact. The second study we're going to be looking at is based in England and Wales with Robert Sampson and Byron Groves, two researchers. It's a 1989 study titled Community Structure and Crime, Testing Social Disorganization Theory, and they surveyed 10,905 residents in 238 localities. And so the main 4 points that Sampson and Groves attributed as causes of crime were low socioeconomic status, ethnic heterogeneity, residential mobility, and family disruption. And these factors were intertwined to lead to community social disorganization. So in regards to ethnic heterogeneity, this basically means that there's different ethnic groups, and low interaction between them leads to low familiarity. And this can lead to low care for neighbors and seeing each other as strangers. But they also mentioned that as the ethnic groups and different groups, people get to know each other more, even if it's heterogeneous or not uniform, it can still lead to more familiarity when they get to know each other. Next, residential mobility means that there's a high population turnover and low home ownership, so it's not a tightly knit community. Family disruption means that the families and parents are not able to supervise their juveniles, and according to Sampson and Groves, two-parent families provided more supervision. And overall, these kind of factors can lead to high crime and delinquency rates. An overview of Sampson and Grove's methodology was that they conducted a very huge survey, and so it's good to have a large survey pool. But their methodology could also be flawed because they didn't take from crime reports and census data, which might have had crimes that they weren't able to get from the respondents. And they also had to trust the respondents' accuracy and truthfulness, which could be a weakness. And so the quote from our text says that their rationale was that previous research had relied on census data that were not valid measures of community structures or crime. And disorganization theory is that even though these smaller studies are conducted and they're analyzed, it doesn't look at a macro view of how social disorganization at a larger scale works. And then some more weaknesses of social disorganization theory are that the results vary across different regions and eras, so it's difficult to generalize. There's also different types of factors that can lead to delinquency. There's different ways to measure the factors, and it's hard to establish actual causation rather than just correlation. For example, with population mobility, um, is it that people are moving out because there's a lot of crime, or as the studies and the researchers suggest, is it that because people are moving in and out so much, that's what's causing the crime? But overall, even despite some of the weaknesses and setbacks, social disorganization theory does hold a lot of impact, and it also influences the programs. And so for Sampson and Groves, they concluded that social disorganization theory, as it arose from Sean McKay's 1940s US-based model, is a good explanation that also applied to England and Wales and other countries too. And specifically for Sampson and Groves study, their conclusions about family structure and society's familiarity definitely affected the legal system and societal views, and so this shows how social disorganization theory does have real-world impacts.